Welcome back, everybody. We're going to be continuing our series on working with your emotional parts today. And today we're talking about getting in our emotional parts in balance. And this is part 4 of that discussion. We're going to talk about critics, judges, and boss parts today. As we're growing up, our parents have a role. They have a role of teaching us what's right and teaching us what's wrong. And as we grow up as children, we begin to develop our own inner judges of what's right and wrong based on partially what our parents are teaching us and maybe our society is teaching us. And what our parents do for us there is they help us towards social success. When we learn what's right and wrong from our parents, then we're able to get along with other people better, right? But there's a temperamental factor to this. So introverts tend to be more sensitive to external stimuli. So if you think about it, like tone of voice is one example. For an introvert, when they're a child and their parent says, no, no, what the introvert could hear is sort of no, no in capital letters and hear it really big, versus if you think about an extroverted child, when they hear no, no, what they hear is kind of maybe like a suggestion. It's more of a lowercase no, no. And so we may see a child grow up with protector parts or critics, judges, and boss parts that look something like this. If that child's an introvert, they may grow up with a constant fear of being criticized by other people. And the critic parts of them, the emotional critic parts of them, are going to could take up a lot of energy and space in what we call the living room. The living room just being sort of our consciousness. And so this kid is going to become very conscious of criticism and the fear around it. And they may grow up with what we would call an over-controlled system. An over-controlled system has, in this case, 4 different critical type parts that take up residence in the living room, and in this case have taken over the entire living room of this person's life. And so what we might call this is a perfectionistic system. This kid's going to grow up with perfectionistic tendencies. And an extroverted child, on the other hand, might grow up with underdeveloped inner critics. I've seen extroverted children who are kind of messy because of that, or they don't shower for several days and they begin to smell and someone has to kind of tell them, right? Because those inner critics haven't been as highly developed as they might in another child. And so that can create issues socially, right? If someone's messy or if someone doesn't smell good, that could be a problem. Here in this picture, we see the critical parts of this person can barely make it into the living room. They're not quite making it. They're sort of in the basement. They're trying to make their way up, but they're not quite there. And so this child might have a problem with these functions. The best case scenario is the picture that we have here to our right. Here we have healthier forms of the critics. So we see that this child has these inner critics, inner judges, and boss parts, but there are in a much healthier form and picture. And this is what we would say what happens as Christians when our spirit-led self, the Spirit of God, is leading us and conducting the show. And so in the middle of the picture, we have this picture of a sun, a picture of the Spirit being at the center and all these parts being there, but being in a healthy form because the Spirit is in the center. So that's what it can look like. Now, what does it look like sort of on a micro level? That's sort of the macro, but on the micro, that might mean that a moralist part can be transformed from being harsh and rigid and judging to a softer and gentler and more compassionate stance. So I think there are lots of us who have this kind of part in us, the moralist, the one who likes to follow the rules and likes other people to follow the rules. And that can be either harsh or it can be compassionate. And we want to shift from the extreme form to the Spirit-led self being in leadership of this part, so that this part is more compassionate. Here we have a friendly manager part out in front, but originally this part was a yelling, driving boss part, telling, the yelling, driving boss part of this person thought that the person wouldn't get anything done if this part didn't yell and tell it to get in shape. And why aren't you good enough? And you got to do this better, and you got to do it faster, and you got to do it longer. But that can be transformed. The spirit-led self can reassure this boss part that his concerns are being heard, that his fears are going to be worked through, and that this part can now take a new role within the system. A new role can emerge for him. He can become the planner. He can be the one that says, okay, we're going to get this done within a month or within a week or within a year. And so instead of being driving, it can become the planner and help this person get the things done that need to get done without having to drive with the whip or the bullhorn in this case. What happens? What's the problem? Sometimes the problem with us is that our emotional parts are working too hard. Our emotional parts often have good intentions, but they often attempt to steal the glory from God. If you think about these critic parts, these judging parts, these bossy parts, often they think they're doing God's work by making us feel guilty or making us feel shame or telling us to pick us up. We got to pick ourselves up by our bootstraps. They might have good intentions for the entire system of ourselves, but often they're stealing the glory from God. They're going beyond where God has asked us to go. It's God who brings conviction into our lives. It's God who's supposed to motivate us toward doing right, doing wrong, or doing right and doing well in his kingdom, helping others. So what happens here is these parts are taking up too much room. And if they're taking up too much room in the living room, then there is no room for the Spirit. And we talk about as Christians that we understand that we can quench the Spirit of God. We can put out the fire of that sun that should be in the middle of our lives. So now what? Well, we need to remind these parts that we're not trying to get rid of them, okay? We're not trying to throw them under the bus. We're trying to understand these parts and what they're trying to accomplish with a dialogue with our spirit-led self. So we need the Spirit of God to be in control. We need the Spirit of God to help mediate between us and these emotions. We need to get to understand these emotions, why they're doing the things they're doing. And this process can take time. We talk about this in the group often here, that this takes a lot longer than any of us want it to take. But be patient with yourself. So it does take time. And it often involves finding other parts that are in coalition or opposing the part. So any one of these parts that you find and you begin to try to work with it, in this case, you see there's a coalition of critical parts. And in this case, some of them may be working together or working against each other. And so it takes some time to sort all this out. What we could talk about, sort of an image for this, is thinking about a conference table and letting each of these parts have a say, and then letting the Spirit of God minister to each of these parts after they've had their say, after they've said what they want to say, allowing the Spirit then to be able to minister to them and help them understand what would be a better role for them than an extreme role of extreme criticism or extreme bossiness, so that they can take a healthier form within our system. If you want to join us live, you can go to meetup.com/checkyourcompass, and you can find out what our schedule is on there. Or you can check out the videos that we tend to upload on a weekly basis on YouTube or Facebook. I want to acknowledge that the ideas that we shared here, some of them come from a book by Tom Holmes and Lori Holmes, along with some illustrations. All the illustrations here were done by Sharon Eckstein. So thank you for joining us today.